You're allowed to be a Spanish speaker who is still learning. I think this is something I really needed to hear when I was younger, because I don't know if it's just me, but I think there's this assumption that if you're a native Spanish speaker, you're just like automatically confident speaking Spanish. You know, I wasn't growing up, and honestly, I still am not. I grew up speaking Spanish, so Spanish is my native language, but it's not like I grew up sitting there just thinking like, wow, I speak perfect Spanish. No, I messed up grammar. I'd forget words all the time. I'd say things incorrectly. And when I was around other Spanish speakers, especially my family and especially those from Mexico, I would become so aware of myself and how I was speaking in Spanish. I don't think I actually realized how much I struggled with my Spanish until I got to college. I took a Spanish for Spanish speaker course. I remember thinking like, oh, there are actual things in my own language that I don't actually know. And then fast forward to grad school when I applied to my bilingual education teaching credential program. The interview to get in was completely in Spanish, and I was like, okay, it's conversational Spanish, I got this. But then they started asking me questions using all these educational terms, and even though I knew perfectly well what I wanted to say in English. And then I got into the program and they put us into a dual language school. And I was surrounded by all these teachers who, in my mind, were incredibly intelligent, highly educated, and these amazing Spanish speakers. They had their teaching credentials, they had masters. I remember being so intimidated by how confident they all seemed to speak Spanish. And I wonder how many of them were actually thinking the same thing or even still learning. Because the older I get, the more I realize that being a native Spanish speaker doesn't mean you know every word. And it definitely doesn't mean that you stop learning. I'm still learning all the time. I saw the biggest growth in my Spanish when I became a mom, because I started speaking Spanish like 24/7 now with my girls. And I started realizing that when you actually use a language every day, you naturally start noticing things you didn't notice before. I'll Google Translate a lot still, literally still doubt a lot and be like, did that sound right? Did I say that right? And I'm constantly still experiencing these I was today years old moments. Like when I found out that the days of the week and the months of the years are not capitalized, I was like, I think that's the part that I really want other Spanish speaking parents to hear. You're allowed to still be learning too. You're allowed to have vocabulary gaps. You're allowed to look something up, Google Translate. You're allowed to say things incorrectly and then learn it the correct way. And you're allowed to have a Spanish accent that doesn't sound like everyone else's, or that doesn't sound exactly like your family's. And you're allowed to have a Spanish that was influenced by where you grew up. O sea, porque soy norteña y me crié en California con una mamá sinaloense y también fui muy novelera y así hablaban. So, of course, my Spanish is going to sound like me. And most importantly, you're allowed to become more intentional about your Spanish as an adult, to make that choice now. It's never too late. So if you're a native Spanish speaker and sometimes you feel like you're not Spanish enough, you don't have to be a perfect Spanish speaker to speak it or to pass it down to your kids. You're allowed to still learn it, because I still am.